But down the Mishnah and the Gemara in Avodah Zarah that the primary reason why the rabbis made this prohibition was in order to every nation, so to speak, true to their own God-given divine purpose. Now, with regards to, so there were several prohibitions that were enacted. There was a prohibition against pas, bread, also bishul, foods that are cooked by a non-Jew, and also shemen, oil. And we learned that with regards to oil, it was not accepted unanimously by all communities at the time of the enactment, and therefore did not take on the strength of law. So today we don't have to be careful about not consuming oil that was made by a non-Jew. It has to be kosher, but the actual production is not a problem. And on the contrary, for those that are going to be stringent, it looks like they're going against the Beis Din that was matir it, that permitted it. We're up to halacha base. Now in this halacha, we're going to contrast the difference between pas and bishul. I gave it in my introduction last week that on the top level, meaning to say in terms of the reason for the prohibition, for pas and bishul, they are the same, as a safeguard against intermarriage. But the details of the prohibition, what's prohibited, what's not, differ depending on which subject we're talking about. With regards to pas, only something that's made from the 5 grains. The exclusion of something, let's say corn or rice flour, would not be in the category of pas. Only if it's made from the 5 grains, wheat, oats, spelt, rye, or barley, turn into a flour substance and then turn into a dough and bake, that would be in the category of pas and halacha. If I take even the 5 grains and I cook them, so for example, I make macaroni, that becomes a question of bishul akum, not pas anymore. And bishul, the qualifications there are that it has to be the kind of food that would not be edible in the raw state, to the exclusion of carrots and apples, for example, which shall be eaten raw. So those are not a problem if a non-Jew cooks them. And to the exclusion of something that's not considered to be something you would serve at a fancy event. So for example, let's say popcorn. Popcorn is a snack food. You wouldn't serve it at a state dinner. It doesn't fit the vibe, so to speak, the atmosphere that you're trying to create. It's more of a snack food. It is a snack food, right? And therefore, it wouldn't be a problem if it was made by a non-Jew. Okay, halacha base. I have the pasakum bishalakum base. You could ask, even though both Yisra pas and bishalakum are similar, they're both foods that were cooked by a non-Jew that are prohibited. This is referring to bread. This is referring to cooked foods. Nonetheless, they're different from one another in terms of stringency and leniency. They each have a component about them that's more stringent and more lenient than the other. So in that sense, they're polar opposites. The rabbis only said that only Bishul was only prohibited if it's a kosher food, for example, potatoes, chicken, meat, fish. Yes, these kind of foods, the kosher foods, they have to be cooked with the Jews' participation. They would be served by a fancy event. By the way, I used to have a colleague, not a colleague, someone we gave a hechsher to. He was a professional chef, and he used to cook for state dinners. He cooked like for 5,500 people. So I had a question whether or not something with the type of food that they would serve. I would ask him, and he knew firsthand that generally speaking, they didn't serve anything from a can. They didn't serve canned food, generally speaking. Also, the type of food that you wouldn't serve when it's raw, meaning it's not edible raw. So potatoes are not edible raw, meat is not edible raw, chicken is not edible raw, and fish, generally speaking, is also not edible raw. You're going to ask me about sushi, so I have a good answer for you. First of all, I don't know if the majority of people in the country eat what's it called, surimi, the raw sushi. Sashimi, yeah. That gets me nervous. I stay away from that stuff. I eat sushi, but even having non-cooked fish mixed into the other food, I'll do it, but not my favorite. So it's not something that I think that the majority of people would eat. Plus, even sushi, sashimi, it does go through a certain amount of prep. People don't take a straight fish and just go ahead and dig into it. It's not considered to be nechol. The bread baked by a non-Jew is also prohibited, even though it's not a pas chashuv. We know it's not a chashuv of bread. Shasu Chazal call a nikra pas. The rabbi said anything that's called bread, even though it's not something you would serve at a king's table, it's still also. Nimta shachamura pasakim and bishalakim. So it comes out that pasakim is more stringent than bishalakim. V'chein lahepach. So to in the reverse, there's a kula yesh kula b'pasakim. There's a leniency with regards to pasakim that you don't have by bishalakim. They kelu harbe. B'yisr pasakim, the chachamim were more lenient with regards to pasakim. B'kibin shalei yispashid Yisrael b'chol Yisrael. The prohibition was not spread forth in all Jewish communities at the time of the enactment. They said bread from a nachtim, from a baker, from a non-Jewish baker, is permissible, commercially, as far as we explained. But the isur, so that's the leniency side about pas. But by bishul akum, it was spread forth by all communities alike, and it took on the full strength of law at the time of the enactment. There's no difference between food's cooked by a homeowner or a manufacturer. When it comes to bishul akum, they're both prohibited. Whereas with regards to pas, we said pas balabais is asur under most circumstances. Actually, there are being down in a certain case it's still mutter, but in most circumstances it's not allowed. And pas nachtoy, meaning from a baker, it's allowed if you live in a place where you can't get pas yisrael in a certain reasonable distance. Yes. And why is that? Because a baker, the concern about intermarriage is somewhat mitigated with regards to a baker. Why? Because a baker is not selling a Jewish person bread because they want to befriend them or they want their children to marry each other. They're doing that because they want to make a living. So it's not coming out of a position of where they want to just engender friendship. It's coming because they have a business to run. Yes. Whereas when it comes to pas balabayis, when it's a private homeowner, it's much more of a personal type of experience, and we're concerned that could lead to intermarriage much more readily, and therefore it's usher under most circumstances. We're going to explain all these details at the right time. Anytime we say that it's allowed to have a food that's pasakum, or it's not a problem, but bishalakum, for example, let's say it's edible raw. So talking about obviously when we know for sure, we were able to ascertain that there's no forbidden substance in the food. The food still has to be kosher. So now I just want to point out here to reiterate this that we're saying about bishalakum. We're saying besides the fact that we have to make sure the food's kosher, prepared in a kosher manner under kosher vessels. Yes, all that stuff. We should know there's another prohibition that it cannot be cooked fully by a non-Jew. As long as you weren't able to ascertain there's no forbidden mixture, you can't eat bread that doesn't have a hechsher because it might have forbidden substances in it. It would be shulek. Because the bakers or the manufacturers will mix in ingredients at times that would be non-kosher, therefore they need a hechsher. Any questions?
I'm just wondering, how is it that it's enough for a non-Jew, for a Jew to just turn on the oven and then like the non-Jew does all the rest of the cooking? Because the concern is that the non-Jew is cooking for you.
So it's a good question. The concern is we don't want to have a situation where there's going to be a feeling of indebtedness fully to the non-Jew. Oh, wow, look what you did. You took something that was inedible and you made it ready. You took something that was like a rock, right? Frozen rock, and you made it into a delicious, sumptuous meal. Once the Jew lights the fire, then the non-Jew didn't do that entirely themselves. It was done with the participation of a Jew. The rabbis didn't say that you're not allowed to have non-Jewish domestic help in the house. They said you cannot have a situation where the entire preparation of the food is done by the non-Jew because it's going to bring about a feeling of indebtedness which could lead to intermarriage. Once we don't have that entire feeling of indebtedness anymore, it's a joint effort, then the concern is mitigated. You're correct. We're going to get to that. With regards to Bishul, the Svardim, the Mechaber, who's the Baal Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Cairo, who the Svardim follow as their halachic decision maker. He's more strict about Bishul Akum. He says in order to make the food Bishul Yisrael, it's not enough for the Jew to light the fire of the weight of the burner. Simas Kedei Al Ha'esh is the Lashon brought down in Shulchan Aruch in Kuf Yud Gimel. by the Mechaber, that putting the actual pot on the fire is what makes the food Bishul Yisrael. Today it's known as Bishul Beis Yosef because it's Bishul according to the Beis Yosef standards. So case in point, to bring out your point, very good point, which we're going to get to in our next subject, but since you already asked it, I want to explain it fully. When we have a catered event, for the Sfardim, the mashkichim get paid more money. Why? Because when, let's say, for example, you're going to do a steak on the grill, or you're doing hamburgers on the grill, it's not enough for the mashkiach to light the actual brazier or the grill. The mashkiach has to put every piece of meat, every burger on the grill, so they're actually actively cooking. And in the kitchen, the environment can get heated. It's it's a fast-paced environment. So mashkichim get paid more for Bishul Beis Yosef because it's a lot more responsibility, and it's also it's a more high-pressure environment. Unless you have unless the chef himself is a Shemer Shabbos, then you already have it all encapsulated in one thing. But the point is, it's more challenging to accomplish. In a kosher restaurant, according to the Ramah, which would be the Ashkenazi way of doing it, Mashgiach comes in, lights all the fires, turns on all the ovens, and then they start cooking. Mashgiach is watching, making sure they're not doing anything out of line, but that's how it works. But he's actually turning it on. So what the Sfardim do by the Achshedim, by the way, many times they'll just hire a religious chef. It's just easier that way, because it's all taken care of that way. But let me tell you one more thing I want to say, that I've been in commercial kitchens many times. It's a very high pressure environment. If they have to prepare meals for a lot of people and timing and everything, so it's not a trivial matter. Yeah.
So for the Ashkenazi restaurants, they turn on the fire, but they still need to be there. The mashgiach needs to be there.
You need a mashgiach there for other reasons, to make sure they don't bring in ingredients that are not allowed to be brought in, to make sure that there's no mixing of fish and meat. There's a lot of things to look out for, but in terms of the actual cooking, it's enough if the mashgiach just lights the fires, according to the Ramah, according to the Ashkenazi way. Yes.
Right.
Okay, so some out of town restaurants, some of the chefs will allow mashgiach to come a few times throughout the day. Let's say every few hours. The mashgiach will come in the morning, light all the fires. I know that some local vadim will do that. None of the large achshedim would allow such a setup. None of the large national achshedim we wouldn't allow such a setup. Out of town, where they don't have much choice, it's hard to find a mashgiach tamidi. This is what they're doing. It's a setup that I'm not personally comfortable with, but I understand why they're doing it, because they don't have much choice. I'm sorry? A bakery is different than a restaurant, though. Yeah, a bakery is a little bit different, depending. If it's just a bread bakery, but if it's other things, if you have multiple statuses, you have dairy and parv, and it's a fluid environment, it's not so simple. So it's something that it needs to be evaluated by an expert kosher authority to determine whether or not what could be done. But in general, it's a risky type of thing to do, and I'm not comfortable with it as terms of advice. I understand people do it, and they have to try to do the best they can because they're under more difficult circumstances.
So
the mashgiach only has to be someone Shomer Shabbos, or he has to be like village tzitzis and
Mashgiach has to be someone who's Shomer Shabbos. It could be male or female, and someone who keeps kashrus and keeps Shabbos. They don't have to be, so to speak, the most learned person. They have to just know the responsibilities and be someone who is responsible to carry out the responsibilities. There's another interesting discussion that gets into this. Can you hire a very young age mashgiach? Let's say you have a 16-year-old, for example, male or female. So the answer is that it depends on their level of maturity. It's a 16-year-old who has a lot of self-confidence is going to be able to say, hey, this cannot be. You got to do it this way. It's okay. But if the 16-year-old doesn't have that self-confidence, it's not going to work for that. When I was in camp many years ago, there was a 16-year-old who was the chef for the entire camp. He cooked like for 40 people in an overnight camp for 10 days. Very mature guy. He went on to become a very successful CEO. Like he was ahead of his time, you know what I mean, of his age bracket. Such a person could be a mashgiach, but if it's a timid 16-year-old, it's not going to work because you have to be able to speak up.
So when we go to restaurants, we should look into like that the mashgiach is actually there.
It should be a reliable hashgacha. The reliable hashgacha would have such a requirement. Some hashgachas would allow the frum owner, the religious owner, to be their own mashgiach also, depending on the type of restaurant it is, or if it's a bakery, depending on what's the complexity. I'll give you a general guideline. We'll allow a religious owner we'll give them responsibilities. In Hebrew, we would say that biyodei lasis. It's very obtainable. For example, if their responsibility would be just to turn on the fire, they open up the establishment in the morning, and the only thing the religious owner needs to do is to turn on the oven. It takes 2 or 3 minutes. It's not a very big tircha, it's not a very big bother, even though the owner is thinking about paying the mortgage, balancing the budget, all the things that's on their mind. It's not a big deal to just turn on an oven. So maybe we'll have a checklist to make sure that they did it. But when it comes to something, let's say checking vegetables for insects, which is a very tedious type of job to do, and it takes a lot of time, we wouldn't entrust the owner to that, not because we don't trust the owner, but because you can't give them a responsibility that's not going to fit with their dynamics. Their dynamics are they're what's known in Hebrew as metured b'daitei. Their mind is occupied, right? People jokingly say, "Someone you're working for a company, my mental space is rented out by this and this company right now, right? So you're not available. So the same thing, the owner is not available for these things. So we have to be reasonable what kind of responsibilities we're going to entrust them with. But conceptually, it could be done under the right circumstances. Ready for a story?
Yes.
I think I may have mentioned this last week. I don't know. The Rebbe, I told the story about the Rebbe in Paris.
Yes.
I said it last week.
That he worked as a mashgiach?
The Rebbe got up early in the morning to walk to a bakery in Paris to light the fire for Pas Yisrael. When the Rebbe were in Paris. And the Rebbe told Rabbi Yoslavsky, who's a senior Lubavitcher Rav in Eretz Yisrael, he lives in Chas Chabad, I believe. The Rebbe told him in Yechidus that Chasidim zenen zeyer makpid of Pas Yisrael and Chol Yisrael. That's the Rebbe's lashon. Chasidim are very, very careful and stringent about Pas Yisrael and Chol Yisrael. And we're going to learn soon that the reason why there are those that are lenient with regards to Pas Yisrael, they live in a place where they can't get Pas Yisrael, have Pas Palter, and it actually says so in Shulchan Aruch, because Allah Pas Yechir Adam, because bread is a staple for a person, but staple food, you need to survive. But Api Chasidus, Api Kabbalah, that same reason that in the revealed part of the Torah is a reason to be lenient, that same reason, according to the Kabbalah, would be a reason to be stringent. Because the bread is our staple food, we want to make sure it's going to come from the holiest possible source. We want to make sure it's Pas Yisrael. That's from the students of the Arizal. Reb Chaim Vital writes that. So Chassidim are very, very careful about Pas Yisrael. Okay. What's also interesting in some communities, although I haven't seen this, I've heard it directly from people. I think the Bukharim have such a custom where they have these breads that are baked, where they're sticking onto like a dome wall of the oven, a certain kind of it's an exotic, very, very tasty bread. It's a large dome bread. And when they have a celebration, whether it's a bris or it's a simcha, it sits in the middle of the table and everybody takes off pieces from the bread. It's a celebration. So bread was like a celebration. So it brings people together. That's why the Chazal said, when it comes to eating food, we have to do it with a little bit more mindfulness to make sure it's done in a Torah prescribed manner. Halacha Gimel, lechem hu echad min agreim l'skarvus b'nei adam zeh. Bread is something that brings people together. It bonds people. The Mishnah said, we're not allowed to have pas nachim. We know that we shouldn't come to bond with them, and come to intermarry with them. Rather, we should be separate from them, meaning that each nation should be true to their God-given purpose. It's not meant to, God forbid, to put down the non-Jewish nation. It's meant to say that each nation has their special purpose, and once you mingle them, each nation gets diluted, and they're no longer being true to their purpose. Even a Nachri who doesn't have children, so what are you worried about intermarriage? They don't have children. Their bread would also be because the Chachamim did not make a distinction and say only ones that have children are problematic. No, they said you're not allowed to. It was a blanket umbrella type of policy. Halacha Daled. Tam heter paspalter, isa pasakamli nespashet b'chol Yisrael. The prohibition of paspalter was not spread forth in all Jewish communities. B'shosha gazel olav b'me'am tanoim. At the time when the rabbis made this prohibition, at the time of the Gemara, the Tanoim, again, it's brought down in the Gemara in Avodah Zarah Daf Lamed Hey. But it's a type of prohibition that most people couldn't bear with it. It was too much because they needed bread to survive. Why? Because bread is a staple food. There are places, there are places where you cannot find a Jewish baker, and they'll be stuck. They're going to go hungry before the days of matzah. I'm kidding. It's a problem. They needed to have bread. Therefore, the minig would be to be lenient to allow paspalter, which is a non-Jewish baker whose whole occupation is to sell the bread to make money. Yes, you can buy from them because again, we're not worried about it engendering a feeling of closeness, and it's going to lead to intermarriage because their whole intention is only to be able to make parnasa. They'll be friendly to you because they want to keep you as a customer. They're not trying to create a long-term friendship for the sake of the friendship. Why? Because okay. So he's further amplifying the reason, but the concern about intermarriage would be pas balabayas, bread from a neighbor, from a regular homemaker. But a baker is busy doing their work, so they're not thinking about these things. They're just thinking, okay, I got to get up in the morning. I have to make sure I have my flour. I have my products out there. They're thinking about running their business. They're not thinking about other things because that's where they're in now. That's the space that they're in. Therefore, eating the bread does not engender such a feeling of closeness because there's another preoccupation going on here. Is that clear?
But so originally, if I'm understanding correctly, they said that you should do pas Yisrael, but then because it was too difficult for the people
in a place where pas Yisrael is unavailable, it's permissible, according to halacha, to have what's known as pas palter, bread baked by a non-Jewish baker. It is today, but there are qualifications that have to be met. How do we define not available? So he's going to say that it's not available within 20 minutes distance from where we are, meaning if the pas Yisrael is at least 20 minutes distance or more further away from where we are, then a person would be in a category where they're permitted to consume pas palter.
Do Chassidim go by this?
No, Hasidim are still stringent. I'm talking about what halachically is allowed, but nonetheless, Hasidim are stringent. The only time paspalter is permissible is if pas Yisrael is unavailable. Like it's your question, how do you define unavailable? Yes, available. The Chacham gave clear guidance in this matter, and they are as follows: as long as pas Yisrael is available within the shir of a meal, and a meal is a distance of about 18 minutes. Some say up to 24 minutes.
By car or by walking?
That's a good question. I don't have an answer for you. So he says it, but he does say over here, he says this exact question. He brings down the footnotes. There's a dispute amongst the authorities. Do we go after the distance of time or how long it takes to get there? So one opinion says it's dependent on the amount of time. One opinion, meaning the amount of 18 minutes. One opinion says depends on how far it's from. So there's room to be stringent, even to say by car, but there is a dispute. So let's see someone's traveling, yes. They have no bread. Let's say they're heading north, and they have no bread. So 4 milim in front of them, which would be about an hour and 12 minutes or an hour and 25 minutes away, in that direction, whether by car or by foot, they will have bread pas Yisrael. Then they still have to wait. Also, look at pas palter nochri. That would be for a Sephardi. Sephardim are stricter, which is what you brought up. Even in this regard. But for an Ashkenazi, so up until now we spoke about that would be for a Sephardi. An Ashkenazi is allowed to have paspalter, even if it's available, even if pas Yisrael is available within the shear of a meal, within 18 minutes or 24 minutes, depending how you define that, as long as one of the following two things are in place. We're now on the top of page Zayin. It's much better quality. Let's say someone loves sourdough. Yeah, and the only sourdough available would be paspalter, much better quality, and the only paspalter bread would be, let's say, regular rye bread. So for them, that would be a halachically valid reason to be lenient, even though Hasidim are stringent. Or even if the pas Yisrael is available, and there's similar type of products, but the price differential is very significant, where the paspalter is much cheaper. The difference between the price of the paspalter bread and the pas Yisrael bread is significant according to that person's financial status, meaning it would make a difference to them financially. If the person doesn't really matter to them, then they shouldn't be lenient. But if it does, that's also a valid reason. But just for a difference of price of a few pennies, one should not buy paspalter and pas Yisrael Mitzvah if paspalter is available. Now I want to bring out another point. Even for those that are lenient that have paspalter throughout the year, when it comes to Aseret Yimei Teshuvah, during the 10 days of repentance between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, even those that are lenient the whole year round to have paspalter, they are to be stringent only to have pas Yisrael. Because we're mefashresh b'maisa, we have to examine our deeds and try to do things in the best way possible during this time. We're basically, right, we're sharp, we're polishing the buttons, and we're trying to be our best. I feel Misha Noig Lecha Paspalta Nocha Kol Hashana, we're in Halacha Vav now. Tzorich Lahachmer B'Aser Simei Tshuva Shlei Lacha. They have to be stringent during Aser Simei Tshuva not to eat Paspalter. I feel Me'ein Pas Yisrael, so even if Paspalter is not available, Yesh Le'Yishtada Lefes Paspalter, so then you should bake it yourself. Or Lahachsher Zafias Hanachri, or go to a bakery and turn on the fire to make it Pas Yisrael. Beifen Sheyes Baral Luhan, as we're going to explain further on. Just want to share with you a custom that I have. Because there's a halacha that during Aser Simei Tshuva, all Jews have to eat Pas Yisrael, yes? So within a month before Aser Simei Tshuva, I instruct my mashkichim to turn on the fires at all the bakeries that they oversee that are not Pas Yisrael. And we don't advertise as Pas Yisrael because we're not. We're not assuring Pas Yisrael, but I'm having them light the fire that month or a few weeks before, so that we can have what's known as a tliya. For those Jews that don't know, we can say, okay, maybe they had the bread that was turned on by the mashkiach. It's a certain schos for them. See, it's a ruchnis. That's what you call a chsidish that had. It's a we can say, okay, so we can place it, so to speak. Okay, so I don't advertise this, but it's something we do to try and make it better. Okay, halacha zayin. Oifen heter pas balabayis. What about bread baked by a homemaker? It's a separate thing. There's another leniency with regarding pasakim. A place where you cannot find a baker. You're allowed to even have bread from a balabayis nachri, from a baker. According to the Ramah. According to the Ashkenazi way of learning, if you have no bread to eat, it would be permissible even from a homemaker. We're now on the top of page Ches. They're not allowed to have bread from a homemaker. Unless 3 days have lapsed. They have not eaten bread. So they have no bread for Shabbos. And if those two qualifications are met, then even a Sfardi would be permitted to have such bread. Halacha Ches. The different customs are. Now we're going to get into what Hasidim do. Even though most places they said that paspalter is permissible, many places the custom is to be stringent. Not to eat bread from a nachri. Why? The Chachmei Kabbalah, they forewarned us that from the the position and from the perspective of Chassidus, ein lechol afil paspalter. One should not consume paspalter. V'chein yeshrab hayoyim. There are many people today shemin hagam lahachmer shalei lechol paspalter, not to eat paspalter. V'komakim al pidin muteres. According to the din, it's permissible. Misha ein mekayim minik mekayim lachmer. Someone doesn't have a minik to be machmer. Al pidin they're allowed to. Al feel the minig al machmir, even the minig according to those that are machmir. Mishu roi, if someone who's very hungry, has nothing to eat, yachal lechal feel pas balabayis nochri, they're allowed to have bread from a balabayis nochri, as long as we know it's kosher, of course. It may pass on the if it's not available within the shear of a meal. As long as you know for sure there's nothing forbidden mixed into it, then it's permissible. Otherwise, of course, you cannot eat it. Now I'll share with you another thing about this subject. For those that are lenient and they're going to consume non-pas Yisrael bread, we advise them to toast the bread before consumption. Why? Because in halacha, we find in another area of halacha regarding Hilchos Shabbos, there's a concept known as mitzdamek v'yofeloi. For example, let's say we have the cholent in the crock pot, yes? And it's cooked properly. It's all edible, it's all ready to be eaten, it's fully cooked. But if you let it cook on the oven, cook in the crock pot for another 3 hours, it gets caramelized, it gets more crispy, it gets a little bit more dried out. The flavor maybe gets a little bit more rich. In Yiddish, you say it gets gerotten. It's like deep, really well cooked. That's, when my wife says to me, something burnt, I said, oh, it's delicious. I like it. Not mamish black, but I like it a little bit caramelized. So, mitzamak v'yofaloi, we find in halacha that it is a form of improvement on the status of the food. So as we apply that concept to bread, if you take, let's say, for example, a bagel, or let's say, for example, you take a rye bread from the store, it's ready to be eaten. You can slice it and eat it the way it is, or buy it sliced and eat it. But some people prefer only to eat bread that's toasted because it's a little bit more crispy, it has a little bit more of a different mouthfeel, a different texture. So in halacha, we don't say that toasting the bread makes it pas Yisrael. But if a person's in a position where they're anyways going to be lenient and have non-pas Yisrael bread, we advise them go toast the bread, because then we can say, according to that concept known as bettering the quality of the food, they've already improved it somewhat. So it's a little bit of a ruchnistic spiritual improvement. So it helps them spiritually. That's just an example. As much as possible, we try to add when it comes to spiritual matters of this nature. Okay. Halacha tests. It was kind of reiterating what we already said, but what's the gather of paspalta? How do you define bread from a baker? Manikra paspalta, manikra paspalabayis, paspalta, he pasrav anakilim pelachedim. Bread that a non-Jewish baker baked to sell. Even though in other words, even if a homemaker, if a non-Jewish homemaker baked the bread to sell, that would have the same category as paspalter, because they want to do it to sell. They're not doing it to be friends. Paspalabayis, he pas shanochri ofel tzerch bnei beisei after nochem umnasei. But paspalabayis would be what, let's say you have, for example, a baker who bakes bread in his own home. That's still going to be considered to be paspalabayis because he's baking it just for his home. So we're looking at the context of why it's baked. If it's being baked to sell, that's called paspala, pasnafta, bread of a baker. If it's being baked just for one's home, that's called paspal habayas. Halacha yod ein din pasakim nikbal fimisha pas b'shut. The halacha pasakim is not established by where the bread is found now in its proximity. Ela lemisha also b'afiyasa. Who is the one who was involved in baking it? Lachem bal habayas nachi shakona pas minachtem abal habayas nachi who bought bread from a nachtaim, from a baker and his son. Yisrael gave it to a yid. Adai nikra paspalter. It's considered to be paspalter because it was bought from a baker, and when it was actually baked, it was baked by a baker, and therefore it has a din of paspalter, even though right now it's in the ownership of a balabayas. Kamekin paspalabayas, and the same would be in the reverse. Bread that was baked by a balabayas, nishara b'yisur, remains asur, hagam sheneson lepalta v'koni yisrael mimena, even though it was given to a baker, and the Jew bought it off the baker, because we're going after the time it was baked. That's how the law is established of what the status of this bread is. Either paspalabayis, nachtim. Is that clear? Okay.
Can I ask?
Yes, go ahead.
How can the bread of a habayis, like if he makes it in his house, how can it be kosher if he uses his not kosher?
Good question. So let's say, for example, he has in his basement, he has a special oven just for sourdough. It's only for bread. That would be an example. It's not so easy to ascertain that, but if you're able to ascertain that, or let's say they just got a brand new oven
Okay.
and you're watching them do it. I mean, there's possibilities, but you're right, it's not so practical. Yes.
In my case, that I'm Convert, and I want to visit my family that is in Greece. What I will cook in the same stuff is clean.
So I'm going to help you after class. But I'm going to give you my phone number. Can you write it down now? I'll give you my phone number. And that's more of an involved question. I'll try to guide you with Hashem. So 718 791 7999. So send me a WhatsApp, and Mitzvah maybe sometime next week I'll try to help you with that, okay? For those of you who are wondering where I got such a number from, I got to choose it myself. Many, many years ago when they were giving out cell phones, you'd be able to choose your number. I chose such a number. Okay, okay, we're up to Halacha Yud Aleph. Okay, we're going to stop by Halacha Yud Aleph. I want to tell a few stories that are related to food. They're related to the subject, so it's my way of giving myself not feeling guilty about it, placating my conscience. So there was a Yid, the Chos of the Frierdiker Rebbe. His name was Rabbi the Masmid. He was a very, very lofty chassid, tremendous spiritual levels. And he was very, very careful about kashrus, amongst many things. And he would only eat from a shchita that he himself shechted. In those days, you're talking about in like 1930s or 20s, people used chicken fat and the schmaltz for oil. That was what they used to fry things. So not just meat itself, but anything that was used with the oil, with the schmaltz, would also be affected by this. If he himself shechted the animal, or he watched the sheikhet shech the animal, if he watched them do it. Otherwise, he wouldn't eat the meat. He was staying at a particular family's house. I heard it from the person who was a child in it at the time. And the Rebbetzin knew that she had the honor of hosting such a holy guest. Her husband was a sheikhet. And she served a kugel on Shabbos, potato kugel, that had schmaltz from a shchita that her husband shechted, but her bitcha didn't watch. She forgot. It's hard to track these things. They served it to the bitcha by the meal, and he didn't eat it, just didn't take it. Then afterwards they said, I'm sorry, we just remembered that this was from a shchita that you didn't watch, my husband shechted, etc. But he was margish, he felt that it wasn't for him. There's a story with the Rebbe tells over that brings out this point. There's a zehirus from Rabbi Yehuda Chosid. A zehirus means something that's a spiritual, something to be careful spiritually, even though it's not an actual mitzvah. That in the olden days, the bridges were rickety. They weren't today. Baruch Hashem, we have engineers. They build solid bridges that can carry tremendous amounts of weight. But in those days, they were wooden bridges that were rickety. It was a zehirus not to travel over a bridge when you're in a coach with the wagon. Let the coach go empty, and the people should walk themselves afterwards to minimize the danger. So Rabbi Hillel Paracher, who was a chassid of the Alter Rebbe and the Mitzvah Rebbe and Tzemach Tzedek, yes, he was in a carriage. He was makbid on this Indian. They said about Rabbi himself was like half a Rebbe. He wrote a Sefer Placharim in his Yortzeit, his Yudov. Anyway, he was makbid on this Indian. He fell asleep. And right before they got to the bridge, he woke up for no reason that we can explain. The Rebbe says we see from here that if a person has a zehirus, if they're careful about something spiritually, it has a physical effect on their body, where the body felt they can't sleep now. So the Rebbe is saying that when we have a certain thing that we're careful about spiritually, it has a physical effect on our body. So the same thing over here. Rabbi the Masmid was makbid only to eat from a shchita that he himself shechted or watched the sheikhet shecht. He felt that this kugel is not for him, because he became so refined in that Indian and that particular thing. I'm not saying it's something we all have to do, but I'm bringing out a point. When we take upon ourselves a spiritual thing to refine ourselves, it literally changes our physical body. Have a good Shabbos.
Thank you, Shabbos.
So thank you. It gives me chayas for the whole week. You know, I'll tell a little story. This one story, here comes another story. It's the way it makes it. You know, but Hashem created me. I accept myself. I'm not, you know, I'm not at odds with myself. But I was, when I was 19 years old, my father, of blessed memory, was leading the Pegishas, the Shabbatons. He started it. And I was standing with him downstairs in 770, so it was about to get dollars from the Rebbe. It's like 1989. And he said to me, Yitzchak, I want to introduce you to the Rebbe. And I was like, I wanted to disappear, I wanted to melt. I was like afraid. I put my face to, I mean, I got dollars from the Rebbe, but the Rebbe, and I said to my father, the Rebbe knows everybody here. The Rebbe's a tzaddik. So no, I want to introduce you to the Rebbe. So I couldn't say no to my father. So I was standing right behind my father, and there's like 200 people in this procession behind us. My father got $1 from the Rebbe, and then I got another $1. And then the Rebbe gave me $1, and my father pointed to me and said to the Rebbe, "This is my son Yitzchak." So the Rebbe said to me, "May you follow in your father's footsteps." He gave me another $1. I was awestruck. I left the Rebbe's holy presence. Then I said to my father with a Hanoka trademark humor, I said, "Do you think the Rebbe wants me to become a scientist?" My father was a scientist. He says, No. He wants you to be involved in hafotza, in this kind of work. So when I teach a machon, this is the way to be mekayim what the Rebbe told me. The Rebbe's bracha, because I'm in kashrus the whole time, but this is the embodiment of the Rebbe's bracha. Have a good Shabbos.
That's good Shabbos. You have such special teachers.
Hannah,
Sorry.
Hannah.